In this lecture, we're going to go over quizzes 3 and 4 as a review, and I'm also going to address some of the questions that have come to me in email when I asked for a Q&A that I could go over in a lecture. One question is, what string do you pass to an implicit intent? What's the difference between an implicit and explicit intent? Why do we use startActivityForResult? And what is JavaDoc? I'm also going to add a few questions that I added to the list, which are common questions and things I don't think we covered in great depth yet, but we're going to need to start knowing. So this will all play very well into the exercises we're about to do. So let's start with the quiz 3 pool. Okay, sometimes you might want to receive a result from the activity that you start. In this case, start the activity by calling startActivityForResult. We'll make that work in our app, and what we're going to do, we did a quick and dirty of it several weeks ago, but what we're going to do is, we know here we're actually selecting a plant, and what we'll do is when we click that, we're going to have an option that instead of taking us to the details page where we're going right now, it will take us back to the GPS of plants page, if that's where we came from, and it's going to populate that page with information about that plant. It's going to pass the plant object itself all the way back. This is something that's a very important concept in Android. A lot of times we want to have a screen that will call an activity that will call another activity, and that other activity might do something, add some value to some information, and then pass that information back to the calling screen. So that's what startActivityForResult is. We'll take a look at that either in this lecture or a following lecture. The directory for files that define your app's user interface is called layout. You'll see that in Eclipse. Let's see if I can bring my Eclipse over just a second. Okay. So if we take a look at the directory structure, if we go to res and then layout, that's where all of the XML lies for our layout. Okay. The blank file one more question. Directory for your app's main source files. Okay, so where do we put the activities? Where do we put all the Java? We put it under src. So the src directory is where we put those files. The blank file describes the fundamental characteristics of the app and defines each of its components. That is the file called Android Manifest. Let's take a look at that because that one's very important. The Android Manifest will define things like our app version. Okay, so I'm just going to go look at the source here. If I Control M now, the Android Manifest will define things like the app version. Anytime you deploy to the Google Play Store, you're required to increase this number. Otherwise, it won't know who's on that version. Okay, speaking of which, today is Monday night, and Friday night I recorded a video where I released a new version of Plant Places Mobile. And at this point, 3 days later, it's kind of interesting. I can go back to the Google Play Developer Console, and if we choose Statistics, it'll tell us things like who's using the app. If I go to Statistics and then App Version, this will show me, and actually this page is out of date. Let me refresh this. This will show me how many people in a matter of about 3 days have received the latest version of the app. If I click on App Version, we see that right now 46% of the total installed base has received this update, which is pretty impressive in that little time, in about 3 days' time. Most of those are probably the people on automatic updates. I don't expect the people on version 2 to get this update. And version 5, we'll see some people might have to physically choose to update it. Others might be on automatic updates and they just haven't synced up with a network yet. So that's why that number is important. That is the number that we see when we look at the Android Manifest. We'll see there's a version code and a version name. So the version code is what we're looking at here, this 562. But then if you actually go to the listing on the Google Play Store, if I choose play.google.com/plantplaces, you'll see, you should see Usually it will show Plant Places 5.1. I don't see it on here, but we will if I go back to my console page. You'll see it right here, and actually 6.1 now. Okay, so there's that 6.1, which is the version name. The other things we're going to have, which are very important, are the minimum SDK version that we will specify and the target SDK version. If you go to the Android Virtual Device Manager, this is talking about this API level right here. And, oh, that's interesting. I didn't realize I had one so far back. But 8 is pretty common. 8 and greater is pretty common. So 8 corresponds with the platform 2.2, and that corresponds with whatever the 8th letter of the alphabet is. So I don't keep track of what's donut and eclair and honeycomb, and but this corresponds to those dessert words, donut, eclair, honeycomb. That's what these numbers correspond to. I know them by the numbers better just because that's something I can keep track of a little bit better in my head. API level 8 is generally something that you want to support. But then API level 16 is when we start in that 4 dot range, and there's a lot more features that we can use once we're in this range. There are not many users on version 3, incidentally, but you want to keep in mind you're going to have some audience here on 2 and a lot of audience here on 4, but given that, you don't want to program exclusively for version 2 or exclusively for version 4. Version 4 is going to add a lot of new features like a better Maps, what we'll call Maps version 2. But the consequence, and this is good, it just takes a little more work on our part. The consequence is you have to support threading. You have to use threading if you're doing any kind of network call or any kind of intensive call. So that's the trade-off that we have there. Okay. Whoops. Back to Blackboard then. A blank intent designates the target component by its name. That's an explicit intent, and an explicit intent is where we say that we explicitly want to go from one activity to another. And we say explicitly which activity we want to go to. So if I Control M, and then I go to, let's say, plant search activity, what we'll see is that when I click on the search button, it's going to fire off on search clicked. And here we're saying that I explicitly want to go to this component, plant results activity.class. So when someone clicks search, I explicitly want to go to this component. Notice that it's not in quotes and we're referring to a physical class. That's a sure indication that this is an explicit intent. Okay. Often found in the Android manifest, the blank constant specifies that the activity will start up as the initial activity of the task with no data and no returned output. Okay, let's go back to Android manifest. And if we look, what we'll see is that we're actually already using an intent filter. This intent filter here points to our main menu activity, and you know what? One moment. I took you to the live plant places. I want to take you to the one that we're working on. I was going to say that looked a bit too busy. Okay, what you'll see is that we have several activities defined. We have our location finder, plant search, plant results, and plant details activity. So far, these are all of the activities that we are using in this app. And the one which is the location finder, the GPS screen, that's the very first one that gets called. So you'll see that that has an intent filter on it with an action called main and a category called launcher. Main means this is just a special kind of activity that can start up an application. So it's just the first activity. That's something that we use to mark that first activity. Launcher means that it can appear in the app launcher on the Android operating system. So that's how we indicate that this is the activity we want to start our application. We could change this to a different activity if we wanted. We could have maybe the search activity start. if we simply took this intent filter and put it down here with the search activity. Okay, the main activity for your app must be in the manifest with an intent filter that includes, as we just said, the main action and the launcher category. This type of intent does not name a target. The component name is blank. If we don't name a target, we have an implicit intent, and an implicit intent means that we're going to just find something that already exists on the Android device that will fill that need. So again, if we go back, if I take a look, I think at our location activity. Okay. We have several, sorry, once again I took it to the live one. Location, is it location finder, I believe? That's 15 plant places. Not that, 1 second. Okay, got it this time, here it is, location finder. If we take a look at location finder, we have several methods going on here. One of them is called take photo, and if you look at the method signature, we have the word public, the return type void, the method name take photo, and then view v. This is the signature that we're used to seeing when we are calling a method from a button. So if you take a look, instead of having a fully qualified class name, what we have here is an intent, and we're passing it a constant. And this constant has a string underneath it, which is android.media.action.image_capture. What that says is we're not going to name the physical class that's going to do this work. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to pass it some kind of constant that the operating system knows about. And then the operating system will find the software component that best matches what we want to do. And there might be more than one choice. Sometimes if you click a link, like a Play Store link, you'll notice that your choices might be the built-in browser, or maybe a Chrome which is installed, or maybe the Play Store. So a lot of times, if the Android operating system can't select the best option, it will give you a choice of what things match that intent filter. So that's what that means. That means go out and find something that already exists on the phone that will do this. That's very important for a class like ours where you maybe don't have a whole lot of experience programming, because it's better to tie together software that already exists than to write it from scratch. In the very first version of Plant Places Android, I tried to call the camera from scratch, and I also tried to show the images from the file system using a list, and there were two problems with that. Number one, I didn't do a good job of it. Number two, that's a whole lot more work that I have to do, and that's a bigger footprint of my app. A good app, a good simple app, should make heavy use of components that are outside of that app, and that's where implicit intents come in. I'm just going to tell you that I want to capture an image, and then I'll let the device figure out the best way to do that. So that goes back and answers a couple of our questions that I was asked. What string do you pass to an intent? You pass some string that usually is related to a constant that just says, this is what I want to do. When do you use an implicit and an explicit intent? An implicit intent you'll typically use to call software that exists outside of your application. Software that might do something like an image gallery or a camera or anything like that. An explicit intent is usually called when you're going from screen to screen within your own application. Now, those aren't the only times that those are used, but that's a pretty good rule of thumb. That's when you would tend to use one versus the other. Okay. Okay. The three core components of an application, activities, services, and broadcast receivers, are activated through messages called intents. You can start another activity by calling startActivity or startActivityForResult. You must declare your activity in the Android manifest file for it to be accessible throughout the system. And again, if you recall, looking at our manifest that we looked at just a moment ago, what you'll see is that every activity that we do work through here, the location finder, plant search, plant results, plant details, those are all defined in our Android manifest. So if you're trying to call an activity by using maybe an explicit intent and you're having some kind of runtime error, it might not be defined in the Android manifest. And we know it's very easy to define these if you want. You simply have to go to the Application tab, choose Add, select Activity, and I'm going to cancel out of this. But after, well, that's okay. I can choose OK. I can always take it back. Then what you do is you choose Browse, and you simply enter the class name that you want to navigate to. So we have several that are defined here. Again, I'll go ahead and cancel, and hopefully that will be smart enough to clean it out. Let me go ahead and remove that. Yeah, there we go. Okay, there we go. So you don't have to actually go in and edit XML. You just have to know how to use this wizard to add an activity. Okay. Blank intents do not name a target and are often used to activate components in another application. That is an implicit intent. Blank intents designate the target component by its name and are typically used internal to an application to start an activity, service, or register to receive a broadcast. That's an explicit intent. We talked about that a few moments ago. What is a widely acceptable naming convention for constants? All capital letters separated by underscore. What two arguments are passed to start activity result method? Choose two that apply. Generally, it is an intent and a number that indicates what will be returned when the onActivity result is returned. The reason being, you can very certainly have an activity that invokes numerous other activities for results. So if you invoke the camera, if you invoke the image gallery, and maybe you invoke one of your own activities, these can all return data to you. And you have to have some way to discriminate or tell which is which. You have to tell which result type you're looking at. In our next video, I will reinforce that a bit through an example. Okay. When setting an onClick attribute, set onClick to the method name only. Don't specify the parameters or return type. That's correct. When you're in a layout setting an onClick attribute, only use the method name because the parameter will always be a view parameter and the return type will always be void. So that's quiz number 3. Let's take a look at quiz number 4. One moment, please. Now in quiz 4, we'll see a few repeated questions. One thing is that you'll also notice that you haven't seen all these questions before in your own quizzing. And that's intentional. With an online class, there are about 20 to 21 questions in a typical pool. So sometimes if there's a topic that we've talked about 2 weeks in a row, I might repeat that question in a future quiz because everybody's quiz just picks 5 random questions from the pool. Now, it's a good idea to listen to these reviews for 2 reasons. Number 1, it's a review, okay, and it's to kind of help reinforce anything that you might have only seen one time. Number 2, you're going to see all these questions again when we take a midterm, so keep an eye on that. Okay, first question we already covered, so I won't cover it again. Any questions that were in quiz 3, I won't recover. I won't cover again. An activity only exists in the following static states for an extended period of time in its life cycle. Those states are resumed, paused, and stopped. There's no such thing as a running state. It's just a resume state. Okay, so those are the best 3 answers. You must implement the Oncreate method to perform basic application startup logic that should happen only once for the entire life cycle of the activity. So Oncreate's the best option there. That's one of the first methods that gets called in the life cycle. The blank file, okay, we talked about that one in our last quiz, in our last review. Activities that are willing to receive implicit intents must include the following category and their intent filters. So recall that one is default. Yes, default is the category we want to include if we don't want to specify any other type of category. An implicit intent designates the target component by its name. the component, I'm sorry, should be explicit. An explicit intent designates the target component by its name. The main activity for your app must be declared in the manifest with an intent filter. We already talked about that one in the last quiz, so we'll skip that. We already talked about that question in our last quiz, so we'll skip that. Talked about that one. Again, a little bit of some we've seen before, so for the sake of time, I'll skip those. We talked about that question. When an activity is in the blank state, it is completely obscured by another activity and is now in the background. That is the stopped state. Pause means it's only partially obscured by something like a toast or a pop-up, but stopped means it's completely obscured. Okay. When creating a new activity, you must implement Oncreate. You can start another activity. We talked about that one. You can load an XML layout by calling setContentView and passing the reference to your layout file. We talked about that one. Talked about those two. It's a good idea to unsubscribe from GPS in the onPause method of an activity. This will conserve battery life. Be very careful with that. If you don't do that, you might keep using GPS even after your app is closed. That will run down your battery very quickly, and that will probably earn you a lot of negative reviews in the Play Store. If you have a stream of data, you can read the data and convert it to a bitmap object by using Bitmap Factory. If I have an activity XML tag in Android Manifest, which of the following tags might I see nested inside the open and close activity tags? List only those that are inside of the tag. Intent filter, and then within that, action and category. Component manifest and SDK are not nested within the activity tag. They are valid, they're just not within the activity tag. So intent filter, action, and category are our best bets here. Those are the ones that would be inside of an activity tag. If you're curious, if you're not sure of it, you can always go back and look at the Android manifest, and what we see here is activity, intent filter, action, and category. Those are 3 tags that we'll definitely see within an activity tag. The other tags, application, uses permission, uses SDK, and manifest, those are valid tags, but we wouldn't see those nested within an activity, and that's the keyword. Okay, using satellite GPS requires an annual subscription fee of what? Nothing. Satellite GPS is always free. A little story behind that. That was the result of a Korean Airlines jumbo jet that was shot down because it unknowingly went into Soviet airspace. And so after that loss of life, President Reagan, this was back in the mid-'80s, President Reagan stated that GPS data shall be free for everybody, everywhere, all the time. That was long before we really thought about mobile phones as we do today.